Observation and self-observation. Moving then to examine the idea of work on oneself. We take the thing which we call oneself, that is myself, yourself, as one thing. We think we are ourselves. Work on oneself is thus rendered impossible because how can you work on you, if you and you in each case are one and the same thing? But you and yourself are not the same thing. If you and yourself were the same thing, work on yourself would be impossible. Think for a moment, if you and yourself are identical, or one and the same, how can you observe yourself? Would it not be impossible? A thing cannot observe itself. How would it go about doing that? So if you take you as yourself, and yourself as you, then think that you and yourself are the same thing, how do you propose to begin to observe yourself? You will try to observe you, and how can that be possible? A thing cannot observe itself. A thing identical with itself cannot see itself, because it is the same as itself, and a thing which is the same as itself cannot possibly have a standpoint apart from itself, from which to observe. This is pointed out simply to emphasize how difficult it is for people to begin to work on themselves. The reason is that they take themselves as themselves. If a man takes himself as himself, he cannot observe himself. Everything is himself. He says I to everything. And if a man says I to everything in himself, then everything in him is I, and how can he observe himself? How can I observe I, if they are one and the same? At one moment he is irritable and rude, at the next kind and polite. But he says I to it all, and so cannot see it. It is all one to him. He cannot see it apart from himself, as he and himself are one and the same thing to his mind, to his way of thinking. This massive stumbling block lies across everyone's path, and long, very arduous overcoming of it is the task of work on oneself. How long this takes before an individual can begin to see what it all means, what the work is always saying, varies. I have watched people in the work often, sometimes for years, who have not yet caught a single flash of the meaning of self-observation, people who still take everything that takes place in them as I and say I to every mood, every thought, every impulse, every feeling, every sensation, every criticism, every feeling of anger, every negative state, every objection, every dislike, every hate, every dejection, every depression, every whim, every excitement, every doubt and every fear. To every train of inner talking they say I, to every negative monologue they say I, to every suspicion they say I, to every hurt feeling they say I, to every form of imagination they say I, and to every movement they make, they say I. To everything that takes place within them they say I. In such a case the work can only be something listened to externally, something they hear said to them, the words of which they remember, or not, as the case may be. But they have no idea what work on themselves means, because they have no idea as yet that there is such a thing as themselves. They look out of their two eyes and they listen with their two ears, seeing and hearing what is outside of them. Where, in this case, is this thing called themselves? Is not everything outside them, save something they call I? Is not life a lot of things outside, and something they take for granted as I, that is themselves? And if this work is not about things outside, that they can hear and see and touch, then what is it about really? For there is surely nothing else save outside things, and something that is referred to as I. At the same time they may feel the work emotionally. They may feel that it is about something strange and genuine or real, but cannot see exactly what it is about. They continue to talk as they have always talked, and say I to it all. They continue to feel and to think as they have always felt and thought, and they say I to it all. To all their manifestations, to all their mechanicalness, to all their inner life, they say I. Since everything is I, what is there to work on? This is quite true. For if everything connected with a person in outer manifestations and in inner life is I, and if there is only I, if everything connected with them is I, then there is nothing to work on. For who can work on I if everything is I? What can observe I if everything is I? The answer, of course, is that nothing can. A thing cannot observe itself. There must be something different in it, for the thing to observe itself. In our case, in the case of everyone you know, if there is nothing different from ourselves, how can we observe ourselves, or work on ourselves? For to work on oneself, it is necessary to begin to observe oneself. But if I and myself are one and the same, how can this ever be possible? I will have nothing to work on, for the simple reason that I regard everything I do, everything I say, everything I feel, everything I think, as I, so that if you speak to me of myself I will take it, that you are speaking of me, of what I call I, and whatever you say about me, I will take it as myself, that is, as I, for to my way of thinking I and myself are identical. To my way of thinking, they are one and the same thing. To observe and to observe oneself are really two different things. Both need attention. But in observation, our attention is directed outward through the senses. In self-observation, attention is directed inward, and there is no sense organ for this. This is one reason why self-observation is more difficult than observation. In modern science, only the observable is taken as real. Whatever cannot be a matter of observation by the senses or by the senses aided by telescopes, microscopes and other delicate optical, electrical and chemical instruments, is discarded. It has been stated at times that one of the general aims of this work is to unite the science of the West with the wisdom of the East. If we then define the starting point of Western science on its practical side, as the observable, then how can we define the starting point of the work? We can define the starting point of the work as the self-observable. It begins, on the practical side, with self-observation. These two starting points lead in entirely different directions. A person may spend their entire life in observing the phenomenal world, the stars, atoms, cells, and so on. They may gain a great amount of this kind of knowledge, namely knowledge of the external world, of all that aspect of the universe that can be detected by the senses, whether aided by instruments or not. This is one kind of knowledge, and by means of it changes can be made. These changes lie in the external world. Outer, sense-experienced conditions may be improved. All sorts of facilities, conveniences, and easier methods may be invented. All this knowledge, if it were used in the right way, could only be for the benefit of mankind, by changing the external environment to our advantage. However, this kind of knowledge of the external can only change the external. It cannot change a man in himself. The kind of knowledge that could change a person internally cannot be gained simply by means of observation. It does not lie in this direction, that is in the direction of the outwardly turned senses. There is another kind of knowledge possible to us, and this knowledge begins through self-observation. This kind of knowledge is not gained from the senses. We do not possess any organ of sense that can be turned inward, and by means of which we could observe ourselves as easily as we can observe a table or a house. While the first kind of knowledge can change the external conditions of life for a person, the second kind of knowledge can change the individual themselves. Observation is a means of world change, so to speak. Self-observation is a means of self-change. Although this is so, however, in order to learn anything we have to start from knowledge itself, and knowledge of whatever kind begins from the senses. The knowledge of this system of teaching begins with hearing it, that is, it begins through the senses. A person must be told to observe themselves, and in which direction they ought to observe themselves, the reasons why they should observe themselves, and so on. Whatever they hear or read in this regard, first and foremost must enter through their senses. From this point of view, the kind of knowledge this work speaks about begins from the plane of the observable, just as the teaching of any science. A man must begin by giving external attention to the work. He must observe what is said, what he can read of it, and so on. In other words, the work touches the plane of the senses. For this reason it can very easily become mixed up with the kind of knowledge that can only come through the study of what the senses show, and as it were lie alongside it, or become stifled by it. Unless a person has the power of distinguishing the nature or quality of the knowledge taught by this work, and the knowledge taught by science, unless they have magnetic center in them, which can differentiate the qualities of knowledge, then this mixing up of two planes or orders of knowledge will only produce a confusion in them. This confusion will remain, even though a person continues in the work, unless some effort is made to let the work pass on to where it belongs in themselves. They will judge of the work only by what they see, by other people outside them and so on. The work will remain, so to speak, on the level of the senses. What then is the nature of the effort a person must make in this regard? They must effect a separation in their mind between two orders of reality that meet in them. Man stands between two worlds, an external visible world that enters the senses and is shared by everyone, then an internal world that none of our senses meet, which is shared by no one, that is, the approach to it is uniquely individual, for although all the people in the world can observe you, only you can observe yourself. This internal world is the second reality, and it is therefore invisible. If you doubt that this second reality exists, simply ask yourself, are my thoughts, feelings, sensations, my fears, hopes, disappointments, joys, desires, and my sorrows real to me? If, of course, you say that they are not real, and that only the table and the house that you can see with your outer eyes are real, then self-observation will have no meaning to you. In which world of reality do you live and have your being? In the world outside of you, revealed by your senses, or in the world that no one sees and only you can observe, this inner world? I think you will agree that it is in this inner world that you really live all the time, and feel and suffer. Both worlds are verifiable experimentally, the outer observable world and the inner self-observable world. You can prove things in the outer world and you can prove things in the inner world, in the one case by observation and in the second case through self-observation. With regard to the second case, all that this work teaches about what we must notice and perceive internally can be verified through self-observation. The more you open up this inner world called oneself, the more will you understand that you live in two worlds, in two realities, in two environments, outer and inner. Just as you must learn about the outer world, that is observable, how to walk in it, how not to fall off precipices, or wander into morasses, how not to associate with evil people, not to eat poison and so on, by means of this work and its application, you begin to learn how to walk in this inner world, which is opened up by means of self-observation. Take the example of these two different realities, to which quite different forms of truth belong. Then suppose a person is at a dinner party. All that they see, hear, taste, smell and touch, belongs to the first reality, all that they think and feel, like, dislike, and so on belongs to the second reality. They attend two dinner parties recorded differently, one outer and one inner. All our experiences are the same in this way. There is the outer experience and our inner reaction to it. Which is most real? Which record, in short, forms our personal lives? The outer or the inner reality? Is it true to say that it is the inner world? It is the inner world in which we rise and fall, and in which we continually sway to and fro, being tossed about, in which we are infested by swarms of negative thoughts and moods, in which we lose everything, spoil everything, and in which we stagger about and fall, without understanding even that there is an inner world in which we are living all the time. An inner world we can only get to know through self-observation. Then, and only then, can we begin to grasp that all of our lives we have been making an extraordinary mistake. All that we have taken as oneself really opens into a world. In this world we have first to learn how to see, and for this purpose light is necessary. It is by means of self-observation that light is acquired.